Kia ora.
We also have Jamie Boyle. He'll be assisting possibly in some questions.
Kia ora.
Rick Leasting from Waikato Regional Council's here tonight.
Kia ora.
And Kia ora, Rick. And I mentioned questions. We're going to take questions throughout the night, and we've got Connie helping with those facilitating questions.
Kia ora koutou katoa.
So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully I can show you the presentation. So sing out if you can't see the presentation, but otherwise I'll kick into it. So this is Pāuanui beach-focused engagement. So we've actually gone out and done letters to pretty much the people most affected by the, potentially affected by the erosion. So that's the beachfront properties and the properties just back from the beachfront. There is a wider impact on Pāuanui and the district, but we're really just focusing on those areas. We wanted to do that to ensure that there was an awareness of the project, particularly by the people or for the people who may be more affected. So we've done this for a number of different areas. I guess Moanatari is one. We've got the Thames Coast. Last night we had a Whangamata presentation, and there'll be a couple more to come as well. The second part of it is to try and get feedback from everyone who acted. What we're proposing at the moment isn't final, so your feedback will be useful in terms of guiding or confirming what we're proposing is the right thing, or guiding us towards different approaches. We'll be focusing on, or we'll be giving a bit of context setting to start with, a shoreline management plan overview, pretty brief, and then we'll look at Pāuanui Beach specific erosion issues and the pathways that we're proposing, and then spend a bit of time on how you can get more information and how you can provide feedback. So alongside doing the presentation, encourage you to use the chat function. And so you can type questions in there. We're going to break at certain points, and Connie's going to read out the questions, but also a chance to give feedback. So getting feedback tonight directly is useful, as well as the other forms of feedback we'll talk about at the end of towards the end of the presentation. So firstly, why do a shoreline management plan? And what is it covering? The two major hazards this plan is covering is the coastal inundation and the coastal erosion. So that is the focus. There are aspects of river flooding and slope instability that we've looked at, but those are very much the focus, the erosion and the inundation. And you don't have to go far around the district to see examples. Those examples are quite challenging now. You've got Moanatari and Brophy's Beach just at the bottom, so pretty challenging areas. But if you anticipate the future climate impacts, these things are going to be harder to manage. So we're wanting to stay a step ahead of it in a sense. How we do that? Well, there's guidance from the central government about the process to follow. So that's the Ministry for Environment process. So it starts out with needing to look at what the hazards are. And so quite a bit of time and effort's gone into understanding the erosion and the inundation, and seeing where they impact the communities. So where they cause hazards, and then looking at what matters most to the communities, the values and objectives. The values in relation to what might be impacted by the hazard, but also the wider values, because they can influence the pathways and the decision making. Then you get to looking at solutions or options, and fairly open-ended at the start of that process, considering a wide range of options, but then narrowing it down. And the options aren't just a single option at a point of time. We've also got to consider how those options need to change over time as well. So it's a community-led process, and we're encouraging that and facilitating that as much as possible. That's part of what tonight's about. But we've also established 4 coastal panels. So there's Thames Coast, the Coromandel, Mercury Bay, and then the southeast, which is this one. So those coastal panels are the kind of groups that do the most work on this project. Through the technical team, which I'll describe in a second, we provide all the hazard information. We walk them through what that means, different scenarios. We look at the risk impacts to the community, and then solutions and pathways. So all that's developed with the coastal panels. So the technical team, that's TCDC staff, Thames-Coromandel District Council staff, as well as Waikato Regional Council staff, Waka Kotahi, and forgetting someone, maybe forgetting someone, but hopefully it comes back to me. Then that technical team supports the coastal panel, but also allows reporting up to the governance. So the governance is a TCDC governance, which includes 4 councillors from TCDC and 4 iwi reps. So that's how we're trying to get our iwi participation at that governance level. We have Sandra Gowdy, Tony Fox, Robin Sinclair, and Terry Walker representing the council on that and on that governance panel. Going back a little bit, it's a 3-year project, but probably about 2 years we were doing. I think that you can probably might be able to pick out the dates there. 2021. Around that time, earlier last year, we were getting feedback on what the values were. That's values right across the district, and this word map kind of captures those things. Slightly different for different areas, and I'd say, so this is a combination of the whole district. The natural aspects of the Coromandel, the environment, the beach appearance, and the scenic values kind of all came through, but also accessed it. So being able to access around the district, get to your homes, get away from your batches if you need to. In terms of the East Coast, a bit more of a focus on beaches and the environment. The West Coast probably had that access coming through even more strongly, and that was understandable given the Thames Coast damage that occurred back in 2018. So how we do what we do is we look at the hazards, so whether it's erosion or inundation, and then we look at mapping that. We map that and then start to go a bit deeper in terms of what are the things that are vulnerable or exposed to those hazards. So in some areas there could be very, very little, so no exposure. There might be a hazard, but no exposure or vulnerability probably means there's very little risk, a low risk score. But if there's a lot of houses that are vulnerable and highly exposed, then the risk assessment comes out a lot higher. So that's what we've done. I think we've done it a few different times right around the district, firstly at a high level to kind of rule out some areas that didn't need further assessment, and then drilling down a little bit more in detail. So that's a very quick summary of the project as a whole. Just recapping, it is a 3-year project. We're coming towards the end of the Shoreline Management Plan. What I didn't highlight is after we adopt the plan, there is a need to implement the plan. So we're not going to be implementing in the next 3 or 4 months. That's going to come post-adoption. And there is a pretty good collaborative approach when it comes to Waikato Regional Council. We've got Waka Kotahi, and we're needing it to be community-led, and the coastal panels are a big part of that. Any questions yet, Connie?
Hi everyone. For those of you that have joined after Eamon started speaking, we're taking questions on the session via the chat thread. So if you haven't used Teams before, if you look along the top of your screen, there's a speech bubble. It's got a couple of lines in it. That's where, if you have a question as he's talking, just type it in there. And as we get to a question section, I'll read it out and he can answer. We're also recording and saving this chat. So if you do just have a comment or some feedback on what Eamon is talking about, pop it in there as well, and we will record that and enter it into the project information. So we don't have any questions right now, Eamon, but certainly as we go along, feel free to put your questions in here while we have people to answer them directly for you.
Great, thank you, Connie. So now we're going to focus a bit more on Pāuanui Beach. And the first thing is the hazard assessment, then solutions and proposed pathways. So I'm actually going to hand over to Sian to talk about the coastal erosion. That's the most significant issue we're focusing on today, and it's probably worth noting there's very little risk of inundation. Pāuanui is actually elevated slightly, so outside the inundation zone. So hopefully over to you, Sian.
Thanks, Eamon. So what you can see on the left-hand side of your screen are the predicted erosion lines for Pāuanui over time. And Eamon, it might help if just for a minute you zoom in on some of those lines, just so we can have a bigger look at them. Yeah, thank you very much. So what we've done is that we've used the available shore profile data, so the survey data, and surveys of the beach have been going on for some time in Pāuanui, and there's survey information back to 1944. There's also historical shoreline information that's very useful. So what we've done is, we collated that information together, and then we undertook a modelling exercise which thinks about how that's likely to change in the face of sea level rise, so rising sea level, which would, in normal circumstances, cause the beach to retreat in response to that action. And then, sorry, Eamon, if you zoom back out, what we've done is, if you look at this sea level rise map, sea level rise graph, I should say here, it shows you the different predicted rates of sea level rise, which you'll probably all be familiar with, especially with the news over recent days. The bad news of the news of recent days is that while the green line there at the bottom of the graph shows you the lower sea level rise scenarios that are predicted, the red line shows you the higher scenarios, and the most recent update of this information is the models based on data are showing that we're tracking towards the red, and I'm quite sure what that colour that line is, but it's a orangey, murky, a browny colour. We're actually tracking at the higher end of the rates of climate change. So we haven't seen any change yet in our mitigation measures to reduce emissions. Now, what we do, I should say, that's based on models from all around the world. So they collate all the modelling data from around the world and come up with these predictions. And we have, as for our coastal erosion hazard mapping, we have taken a probabilistic approach. So what that means is we haven't adopted the lowest scenario, we haven't adopted the highest scenario. We've taken the predictions for the lowest rate of rise, for the medium rate of rise, which is that 4.5 rate, which is the blue line, and for the high rate of rise on a precautionary basis. And we've effectively looked at the average potential outcome. So we don't want to be too precautionary, we don't want to be too conservative, and we've looked at a scenario that reflects the most likely consequence of sea level rise. We've applied that to the beach information we have on the beach and the sand that's stored in the beach. And in addition to that, we've looked at storm events and typical storm events. So we've looked at how that storm bite might happen and the sorts of storm cut action that's typical of this area, and predicted where the shoreline could be. So they're not absolute, they're not exact, but they're indicative of what we expect. And you can see that the purple line, which is the purple line and the blue lines, are almost on top of each other. The purple line is where the beach is predicted to be now, beach scarp, in effect. The blue line is where it's predicted to be in 2040. The orange line, 2070, and the red line, which is when you actually start to see that there could be real implications for some of the properties in Pāuanui. That's a prediction for 100 years' time, if things track as we would expect them to. Now, one other point I wanted to make is that these lines that we're showing you now are slightly different from the lines that we previously published for Pāuanui. And effectively, the red line in particular. Actually, Eamon, have you got a slide on that?
Yeah, I've got this one.
Yeah, okay. I'll describe it first. And so the red line in particular has moved and has tracked further inland and is actually aligning with the TCDC future erosion, coastal erosion future line. The reason for that is what happened was you'll know this, but there were works that happened when Pāuanui was developed, where the dunes were pushed forward. They were artificially pushed forward or flattened to give a sort of broader view of the sea. And what that did was that sort of pushing forward at the beach mimicked accretion. And so it gave a sort of false picture of what was occurring in Pāuanui. And actually, the natural trend is more erosionary than that picture we were getting because of those artificial, that artificial action that was being taken. So we've actually removed some of those earlier beach profile data that included that flattening information from the data set that we've used, and that's how we've derived these new erosion lines. Thanks, Eamon. Oh yes, so this table, it shows you the differences. So there's 3 beach profile lines here. That's what the CCS numbers are. You can see that for the 2040 scenario with a 100-year storm event, which is the type of storm we've used, which is a 1% annual exceedance probability event, equates to an 100-year event. Doesn't mean it's going to happen once in 100 years. It could happen at any time, but there's a 1% likelihood that it'll happen in any one year. So for that storm event in 2040, our original maps predicted a 14.7 metre rate of erosion at that first profile line. Our revised maps predict an 18.6 metre erosion or position, I should say, at that profile line, and so on. So you can see the differences over time. Those differences get much bigger. And of course, your range of uncertainty increases as time goes on. Thanks, Eamon.
Yeah, thank you, Sian. And it's probably worth, you have highlighted it, but the erosion lines that are being predicted do align with the work previously done that was put in the district plan. So that's somewhat, well, it's good to know that different processes or different estimates are within that range of uncertainty and are aligning to some extent. So that's only one part of what we're doing, is understanding what the hazards and risks are. The next thing we do is we turn our mind towards the solutions. And so with the coastal panels, we stepped them through all the broad range of solutions, right from avoid, which is a really good thing to do if you can do that before things are established. Not so relevant in Pāuanui here. And you've got retreat options, accommodate options, and protect options. And so you can really see the difference between some of those protection options down the bottom. You've got to defend the current coastal line using rocks, and you've got maintaining natural defences. So quite a different look to the environment. And then we've got to reflect back on our values in terms of what the wider community wants to see for those locations. And so the sense is often that they would prefer a natural defence rather than a rock or a hard defence. And so considering the range of rock through to soft options or hard to soft, you could install something like a concrete wall or sheet piling through to rock, or a breakwater is kind of not as intrusive or as hard, through to edging, I think it is, and then there's living solutions, living shorelines, vegetation management, and sand dune management. So those are the solutions we've considered. And it's worth just noting that the solutions we're proposing, we're going to get to that in the next slide, are not the hard engineering solutions. That's where we're at, but we'll explain that after we've had a chance for any questions.
Thanks, Amon. We do have a couple of questions. The first one is, what does potentially remove assets mean? So that's in reference to something that I think Sian had said.
Potentially remove assets. So that's probably looking at the retreat option. So in terms of the project, what the project's being able to do is say, in some cases, protection is not the recommended approach, or perhaps soft protection is recommended, but that will only last a certain amount of time. And then once the hazard, whether it's flooding or erosion, becomes too great, then we would managed retreat would depend on the level of tolerance. So people might want to accept the hazard and live with it as much as possible, or accommodate it, so raising the floor levels up. But at some point, people may have to move. And so managed retreat, we don't know exactly what it means for specific areas, but at one extreme, it can be making sure people are informed so they know about the hazard, and they can choose to perhaps spend more money on their house because they know the hazard is low and it's not going to affect them for 50 years. Or if it's imminent, they may choose not to spend money, or if there's significant damage, they may choose to rebuild somewhere else. Then you kind of go along the spectrum to potentially supporting or encouraging retreat by purchasing property. So that could happen. Alongside that, you've got the hazard events itself, and you've got the insurance aspect. So the more events you have and the more risky it is, there's potential for insurance to be harder to obtain, and that might drive retreat as well. Right through to, there's some examples which aren't really good examples, or they're examples of where things may have gone wrong. One of those is Matata, where they've tried to enforce purchase to some extent. So we haven't, we're not advocating in any way that's where we need to go, particularly not here, but that is the range of what managed retreat might be. Could be, in some ways you can kind of call it, how managed is managed retreat. It could be very little management of it, hands-off approach and just informing, through to a more active management.
Thanks, Amon. We do have one more question, and it refers to the map with the lines that we were looking at, so you may want to bring that back up. The question is, well, it's in two parts. What does it mean that Pāuanui is not at risk of inundation due to it being elevated? What does that mean? And is the purple line accurate as of 2022?
I'll answer the first one, and while I do, hopefully Sian is able to pull up an inundation or a flooding map. So inundation means flooding, and it's often called coastal inundation because it's flooding from the sea, and there's a distinction between stormwater, so rainfall flooding, and river flooding. So we're talking about coastal inundation. You still could have a heavy rainfall event that causes some localized flooding, but flooding from the sea is much less likely, and the main reason for that is Pāuanui is elevated relative to the sea, and probably relative to Thames, and relative to Cook's Beach, relative to Whitianga, and some communities in the Thames coast. So Pāuanui has an advantage in that it's slightly higher. You might be sharing now, are you, Sian?
I am. Can you see that?
Yep, so that's the harbour side of Pāuanui. So you can basically see the river there, and as you'd expect, the river is low and it's showing inundation in and around the river, but the actual town or the houses within Pāuanui are not affected. Do you have the beach side as well there?
Yeah, I don't at the moment. I can get that, but the picture is the same as the picture you can see here at the top of the harbour entrance.
Okay,
where
I'll just talk through what the inundation assessment is. So for other areas, we've highlighted that we've looked at a 1% storm. So that's a 1% annual exceedance probability, or a 100-year storm. So that's very unlikely to occur in any year, but over a long period of time, 100 years, it should occur once. So it's an extreme event. Then where it's blue, that's showing it's affected by the extreme event. And then these colour indications go up and point to increments all the way up to 1.4. So even after and those are sea level rise increments. So even after 1.4 metres of sea level rise and a 100-year event on top of that, much of Pāuanui, or almost all of Pāuanui, there may be some places right along the shore, but pretty much unaffected by the big flooding events from the coast. Stormwater is not part of that, so stormwater is a different challenge, but relatively speaking, that's good news. And I will share the screen again and just remind me of that second question, which I think I was going to hand off to Sian.
Yeah,
anyway.
I'll answer that, Amon, while you're resharing. So no, the coastal erosion hazard lines we have are accurate as of 2020, or at least the data that was available in 2020 when the work was undertaken, 2020, 2021. So the most recent storm events that have affected the beach, which we're aware of, aren't included in those data sets. However, we are aware that there has been some quite active erosion recently. And so it's going to be interesting to see to what extent the beach recovers from that.
Thanks, Sian.
Any more?
We do have one more question, Amon. It's actually more of a comment, but it's worth reading it out so that everyone is aware of it. Orewa Beach has a good defence line of brought-in scoria boulders. They're working good in the areas that have been protected. And this person's comment is, surely the only solution is to protect.
So that's the type of feedback we're after. And now I'll move to explain what's in this poster and the pathway that we're showing. At the moment, we're not advocating for putting boulders on the beach. And if there were people who think we should and people perhaps who think we shouldn't, we want to hear both viewpoints to understand as broadly as possible what different people are after. So the posters, we're going to use these quite often around the district, so not just Pāuanui, but they have the hazard information. So for Pāuanui, just the erosion hazard information is gone because that's the key hazard. The inundation is not so much of an issue. Some people might not know we're talking about a location map, and the blue line here is just the extent of this policy unit or this area that we're looking at. So in this case, we're looking at the beach side rather than the harbour side. And so in terms of the pathway, which is this thing down the bottom, a slightly blown up version, we're saying right now, so from left to right is time basically. But because there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of time and how erosion happens, we're not able to say we will do this in 10 years or we will do this in 50 years, but we're indicating we will do things when possibly the property boundary is compromised by erosion, when recession continues, where soft engineering becomes ineffective. So those are the things over time. The first ones indicate shorter time periods, and as you head out, we think that's a relatively long time period. So what we're saying to start with is we need to maintain and rehabilitate native species and manage access through the coastal dune. So we are doing that now, and we need to continue to do that. The sediment next, after a period of time, we're looking to advocate for sediment recycling. So along the beach from the north to the south of the airstrip, and the viability of that is under investigation. Then alongside that, we could use soft engineering. So that, I think someone's described it as using machinery to do sand push-ups, changing the face of the sand dunes, but not putting concrete or rock boulders. So soft engineering is an element of but it's not hard, but it's more than just planting and managing the dunes. Move dunes landwards towards the existing grass foreshore. So that's part of establishing a good natural buffer. And we think that all of that will work for quite a long period of time, but there is uncertainty. But given the timelines you've seen on the previous slide, those are some of the indications of time, but we haven't put those there. And then if all in the very long term, we don't think, or possibly just doing the soft engineering might not be enough for erosion to start impacting on properties, and then you may need to think about properties could be damaged to the extent that they can't be there anymore. So how you might want to retreat is a difficult question. There's a lot of time between now and then, but having that thinking incorporated into people's understanding is useful to do earlier rather than later, because having time to transition is often a good thing. The one other thing I'd say that kind of sits alongside this pathway is we do, this project's been going on for 3 years, and we recognised at the start that there will be things that happen before this project's finished and before we're into the implementation stage. And so there are erosion protection, planting initiatives kind of coming under business as usual that still happen prior to this plan being adopted. So that is the pathway. I'll probably just take a second to acknowledge it can be quite confronting, particularly along this stretch where you can see erosion in the long term affecting properties. Another thing I would highlight is the predicted timeframes are indicating where there's relatively no intervention. So the if the soft engineering is effective, which we think it would be, those timeframes would actually be longer than as shown in that legend, or we definitely hope they would be longer. So that's a good place to pause for questions and clarification, and to have feedback. So already got a little bit that rock protection is the only way to go, but if people agree or disagree with that, we also want to hear that feedback as well, or more feedback on that.
Thanks, Amon. We do have a few questions. The first one is, so your proposal is to take a reactive approach, not a proactive one?
Probably a balanced. So I think here you could, what another way of taking that feedback is that you're suggesting we bring some of these aspects forward and do them now. So where we've got sediment recycling, instead of waiting until erosion happens, we actually should get on and do that straight away. So that the answer to that is yes, there is somewhat of a reactive approach to these two items here. So the sediment recycling and the soft engineering along the entire beach. And so we're saying we're not going to do that until there's a certain amount of erosion. The only thing I might say, and I don't know for sure, is perhaps we're very close to that point already in terms of the erosion and the trigger. So even though it looks like we need to wait, that trigger point might already be with us. But yes, there is an element of waiting. And I mean, when you're thinking about relocating houses, yes, definitely waiting. We're not going to jump in and try and relocate houses until it's completely necessary, and that might be, as we're showing here, 50 or even 80, 100 years away. So yes, reactive in terms of relocation of houses, and some aspects of reactive or waiting for signals before we do that soft engineering as well.
Thanks, Amon. We have somebody asking if you could please explain what sediment recycling is.
I will, and if Dan or Rick want to add to my comments, then they can. But basically, where there's excess sand, it's picking it up and placing it in places where there's a sand deficit. So moving sand, trucking it down from the northern part of the beach and putting it in the southern part of the beach. I know in the Gold Coast, it's done at a really large scale, and they have tankers or big ships that suck up sand from the sea floor, and they recycle that into the Gold Coast beach, and that's part of their way they're managing things. And I know of areas where gravel management is done in the same way. So on the Thames coast, in some places, the gravel is actually taken often from the river mouths and used where places are eroding. That's my interpretation of what it is, but anything to add, Sean or Rick, or covered it well enough?
Rick here. I think you covered it well enough. I think one point is that before any sand is moved, obviously you need to ensure that the source material, there's enough there so you don't actually take too much away. So if you're moving sand along the beach, there does need to be some assessment around ensuring there is enough sand in the system to be able to do that recycling and moving. Thanks.
And Rick, it just kind of came to me that you do actually consider other impacts of that process. So if there were birds that breed in certain locations, you wouldn't want to pick up that sand and just destroy that type of habitat. So there's a few environmental considerations that need to go alongside that as well, a few other ones.
Yeah, and look, some of these options here, like the sand recycling, they would most likely require some consent from regional council. So those aspects around ensuring that that work is done sustainably and appropriately, that will be worked through that consenting stage.
The next comment that we have, Amon, relates to the south end of the beach, and the person says, it looks to me that the south end of the beach is urgent. So I don't know if you want to provide any clarification just around the timescales that are being referred to there at the south end of the beach.
Yeah, I'll just jump back up to the slide, hopefully, that has it focused in. Yes, it's quite hard to tell from the lines. I can't, from the map, see that it's more urgent than the middle of the beach, but it may be. So from your knowledge on the ground, I probably accept that you know better than I can remember or I can pick off that map. So if you're saying it's urgent, you're probably right, and there is erosion that's happened at that south end. That probably means some of these things have to happen sooner. So pick that up as a comment. Not able to really confirm it myself.
Thanks, Amon. We do have a number more questions that we'll move through. The next one is, what is the budget that's been assigned to manage erosion in Pāuanui?
I don't have, so there's two aspects. One, this project will allow us to seek more budget. So once we've identified the need to do sediment recycling, we can say that it's been through a comprehensive process. The risk benefit kind of outweighs itself to do that. That is a really good foundation to go and seek more money to implement the plan. So that's one aspect, and we haven't sought more money for the plan implementation at this stage because we haven't quite got a plan. So we need to get a plan before we can get the budget for it.
You've just frozen, Amon. If you can still hear us, we can't hear you. So you may want to try. Is Amon frozen for anyone else, Sean?
Yep,
yeah,
he's frozen for me.
Frozen for me too.
Yeah.
And for me.
Okay, while we're waiting for him to unfreeze, I don't know if there's any of those other questions that you could address in the meantime, Sean.
Sorry, so I'm just looking at where we're up to, Connie. It's the budget that's been assigned to manage erosion. As Amon says, I'm not sure on that one. Do you want to cover the questions or?
Sure. Oh, look, he's going to leave and come back again, so we'll wait for him to do that. But the next question, he can come back to the budget one, which he'd just about finished with. And then there was a question about whether putting trees back along the foreshore might be an option, as they will take some time to mature and become root bound. I don't know if there's anyone here that can speak to that.
Jamie, have you thought about that one?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, it depends what trees you're talking about. Generally, trees don't help dune system self-repair. So if you're putting, say, for example, Pāuanui trees along your front of your dune, they might maintain some sort of root bounding for the sand directly around the roots, but it won't stop erosion ever. You see that on coastal cliffs where Pāuanui trees fall into the ocean. There's some that have fallen in along the shoreline in Pāuanui. But yeah, so using the spinifex and pingao plants that bind sand when it's blowing around are the best for offering some sort of self-repair for that dune system to build seaward.
That's great. Thank you, Jamie. Jamie's our coastal scientist, for anyone that joined the meeting after Eamon made the introductions. The next question is, why can't the Westlock system be implemented in the southern end of the beach?
I don't know what the Westlock system is. Do you, Jamie? Or Rick's put his hand up. I think he might.
Yeah, so the Westlock system is it's like building blocks, basically concrete building blocks that you either put in rocks or for hard defense you'd put in rocks, or you'd put in some of these artificial structures like this Westlock system. I'm pretty sure that's what they're referring to there, Rebecca. Yeah, so it's an integrated interlocking concrete block system.
Yep, so I would add to that. I suspected that's what it was, but didn't want to misspeak. That a defend solution, like a hard defense solution, could be taken in Pāuanui, so the rock boulders or a Westlock system. And if a defend solution was being advocated, then the finer details of how that would be achieved would be investigated as part of the next step. The reason that it's not actually proposed on our adaptation pathway is the general feeling that we've received through the engagement we've done in Pāuanui is that people don't support hard defences, that they love the naturalness of the beach, they love the sand, they love access to it, and they wouldn't like to see that compromised. Because if you build a wall, then you lose your beach.
Thanks very much, Sharon.
Apologies, everyone. I lost internet connection briefly at my end. So hopefully Sharon was able to pick things up while I was offline.
We just finished the question about the budget, Amon, and you'd explained that was yet to come in terms of the project timeline. I'm not sure if there was anything else you wanted to add there. Otherwise, we'll just move on to the next questions.
Yep, great.
So we've answered the next couple. We have a comment to say that all the soft engineering, including replanting, etc., that's been done over the last decade has washed away. So I guess just a point being made. The next question is asking, is it correct that over 100 years the seafront houses will likely be inundated, and it is unlikely that the council will hard protect houses from erosion?
Yes, that is what we're showing in our proposed pathway. So if we follow what we're showing, it is likely, maybe not likely, it is possible that some of the houses will be affected or washed away by erosion in that time period out to 100 years. We hope that doing soft engineering can delay that. But when it gets to that stage, we're going to be advocating not for hard protection and not to put rocks in. So pretty much correct what you've said. This isn't a final decision in terms of the pathway, and that's why we're wanting more feedback on what people want. But that's what the pathway's showing at the moment, pretty much.
Thanks, Amon. The next comment is just to remind anyone that's not aware of the restoration plan for planting that's happening at the south end next month. The person has copied some information into the thread, but it's not really legible because of the way it's been copied. So perhaps, Martin, you just want to put the email address and the details back, just type them into the thread, and then if people want to come and give you a hand with that, they can. The next question is, surely it would be better to spend money on stopping the erosion with boulders than moving sand back and forth. And this person walks the beach often and finds it fairly obvious.
I think if you didn't have to worry about the values of the beach and the desire to have the beach looking natural, from a cost benefit perspective, it might be. Yes, you could. Often the soft engineering is quite repetitive. You have to keep planting, and it's an ongoing maintenance activity that has costs associated with it. Rock may be more effective and a lot more expensive to start with, but you may be doing the job once, whereas the the other approach might be doing it every year for 10, 20 years kind of thing. So putting rocks on, if you thought rocks were desirable for the desired by the wider community in terms of natural values, then that would be a reasonable approach, yeah.
Thanks, Amon. We then have a comment sort of on the other side of that to say that this person strongly believes that maintaining the planting of trees along the reserve assists with retaining the reserve. And the example they give is at the Northern Ocean Reserve towards Billy Point. So that's just a comment in favour of planting. The next question is, why wouldn't you take the sand from the estuary instead of the north end? That way the council can also address the fact that the Coast Guard can't launch at mid to low tide in an emergency.
In theory, that sounds like a good idea. I would suggest the sediment size and the type of sand might not be the same as the sand we want to put on the beach. I don't know if Rick has any thoughts on that, or.
Yeah, no, look, it is a very good suggestion, and in fact, it's been implemented around New Zealand, and Mount Maunganui Beach is supplied by dredgings from the port to keep the channel open. So there is options, but as you say, Amon, the investigation to make sure that sand is appropriate, and by appropriate, just making sure there's no there's very little mud content, so it's going to be almost a like for like type of approach, and making sure the sand there is very similar to what's already on the beach. So yeah, look, I think trying to get those synergies between trying to remove sand from somewhere and being able to place it somewhere else that needs it, yeah, that's a good idea.
Thanks very much, Jamie. The next comment we have is just in relation to boulders or a hard structure, and that is, you would only lose the beach at high tide, which is better than losing dunes and houses. So that's just a comment to be recorded in the thread.
Yep.
The next question is, my concern would be if you move sand from one area to another, the area you move it from could then be affected by erosion due to this change. What guarantee is there that this would not happen?
I think the process around getting consent or being able to do that, you would need to provide evidence that wasn't going to happen. So you'd have to show that there was sand building up and it wasn't going to cause a detrimental effect. So I wouldn't be able to guarantee taking it from somewhere and putting it wouldn't cause that problem, but the process and the steps would have to go through to make sure it wouldn't are reasonably sound. So that's you can be assured it's very unlikely would be able to do it from a consenting perspective if it was going to cause a problem where we took it from.
Thanks, Amon. The next comment is, to be relevant, surely the starting point for this report is that the south end of the beach is more eroded than assumed, and that there is restoration work underway, rather than saying the work starts when the sea's 5 metres from houses, because then it's too late.
Yep, that's some good feedback. So that is really bringing some of these things forward, so that happens sooner rather than waiting to see more signs of erosion.
Great, thank you. The person who had the information about the planting event has put the details in the thread, but also a comment to say that they're absolutely behind a planting and management plan rather than hard engineering. So thanks very much for doing that. The next comment is, it seems fairly clear that the only solution is hard engineering. Why are we wasting time and money with planting and putting Pāuanui Beach and people's assets at risk? We need to secure the beach for future generations. It doesn't matter if we don't all like the look of a hard wall on the beach. It is the only solution. Another person who just wants to record that they don't have any objection to a hard or rock solution on the beach frontage. Somebody else agreeing with the comment about why keeping the beach natural argument is winning over the interests of property owners, especially as it seems that a hard engineering solution is the better long-term solution. And somebody else commenting that scoria and boulders or rock boulders do look more natural than concrete.
So just from me, I'm picking up a couple of things. One of the comments was suggesting we put rocks really soon, and one person said just there that long-term rocks may be the solution. So, but potentially you would avoid, and I'm not sure if we're doing this anywhere, but you'd avoid putting rocks as long as possible. But when the house was compromised in hopefully 50 or so years, then that, so there's a distinction between putting rocks in now or putting rocks in 50 years down the track. So just wanting to tease that out if people have a slightly different thought on needing rocks now or needing rocks in the long term.
That's great. That's all the questions we have at the moment, but and I'm very conscious of the time, but what I would say to anyone that's here is that if you'd like to give us more detailed feedback, Amon's going to take you through that now, but if you have more detailed questions that you'd like answered as well, you can use the email address ourcoast@tcdc.govt.nz, and I'll put that address into the thread now so that you can all see it there too.
Thank you, Connie. So we've had a pretty good bunch of Teams chat feedback. We've got the Our Coast email that you can see there, and I'm just going to take you to our website. Well, that's something else I was looking at. And what this shows is a whole lot of information from our shoreline management plan. So we talked about the coastal panels at the top here. There's minutes and agendas for the coastal panels. It kind of goes through how we've looked at the values and all the things there. The posters that you've seen, you can download all of those. There's 141 different areas. So if you come down to the southeast, that's where you can get your areas from. So that's good. Meeting times, links to join meetings, and that's where we'll put the meeting advertisements when we come back for further meetings. And then there's this feedback tool, which is a really good tool, and it's really good for getting a district understanding of all the things going on. So I'll ask Sian to show that really quickly, but I'll just scroll down a bit more, a few bits of information there. That's a very quick video, 3 minutes, that highlights some of the engagement we've done throughout the project. And what else is relevant? That's probably the key things already explained. But the more time you have, you can use it to scroll through and better understanding of the whole project. Maybe not just Pāuanui. But back to the feedback tool. So this is the tool. That's where you find it. You click on that link, and that will take you to what Sian's about to show us.
Yes. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll try again. Sorry. There we are. Yeah, so if you click on the link that Amon has just shown you, it takes you to this page here, and it's our community consultation tool. There's a home page which gives you some background, asks the sorts of questions that we're looking for answers to. So what do you agree with the pathway? What are your options? What are your views? And it gives you some instructions on how to leave a comment and how to use the tool. If you click on the map, this is the real heart of this tool. Just repeats the information on how to leave a comment and how to get more detail. You click onto that and it takes you to the Coromandel. And then you can zoom in to the area of the coast you're particularly interested in. So here I've already zoomed into the area we're talking about today. And what happens is if you click on a certain section of coast, as I've clicked on this section here, it brings up the details of what the hazard is in that location and the proposed adaptation pathway. So then you can click on that again and actually go and look at that further information where you can sort of see it better rather than on a small screen as we've been showing you today. And the way you leave a comment is there's a little add comment button. Click on that. It gives you the option to add a new feature. You pick that up, it gives you the arrow, and there you go. You can put that down anywhere and type your comment in, and then it saves it here. You can see that there's some comments here that have already been made. So any other comments will be stored and registered. Thank you, Amon.
No, thank you, Sian. Good explanation. I was kind of conscious of some of the, when I'm not presenting, I can see some of the chat coming up. So there were a couple of questions that I'd cover. So one of them was, is cost the driver for not wanting to put rocks on the beach? Only a factor, but not the major factor. I think that the major factor has been that values work undertaken and the understanding or perception that the wider community doesn't want rocks on their beach. So that's the driving factor there. But like I said, still want more feedback on that. And I think that was the main one. In terms of how we developed this preference, I think I've gone through that a little bit. No, there wasn't a vote taken, but there was the values assessment. There was the pathway, these pathways provided at our last open days. I remember those being in person. So it must have been in a week gap between COVID restrictions. So feedback from the open days, the general understanding and input from the coastal panels, and the values work that we've done. So that's kind of why we hadn't jumped straight into solutions. We needed to do the work to build understanding of what the wider community did want. And I might just go back to our normal approach where you read the questions. I'll share my screen in case I need to pull anything up. And so, yeah, over to you to kind of, that way you can understand or hear the question at the same time as we provide the answer rather than just listening to me talk.
No trouble. So we do have another question, Amon, which is, surely the science should be behind the key to deciding the strategy going forward, not emotion.
I would agree. Science is definitely required and a key influence in terms of all the work we do. We base it on the best possible science we can get, but then there are still choices to be made, and so wanting the choices to have as much community input as we can, and so that's the general approach to decision making, not just a science base. There is the views of the wider public or specific property owners that need to be taken into account as well.
Amon, can I just add to that the what the science tells us about rock, and I'm not saying it wouldn't work. It would work to defend those beachfront properties, but what would happen, or tends to happen, is you get end effects. So you get, wherever the rock stops, you get exacerbated erosion. So what would happen over time is you would need to defend the whole of Pāuanui Beach. So you'd end up with a rock wall from top to bottom. That's what the science tells us. And also a comment was made earlier that it's better to just lose the high tide beach and protect the dunes and the houses. You wouldn't protect the dunes. If you built a sea wall, you'd be setting that back. You'd be losing your dunes. You'd be losing your beach. And with sea level rise over that time period, you eventually wouldn't have anything in terms of a coastal strip. And so it's important to think about the type of Pāuanui that people want to have in the future.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Shan.
The next comment is, we have been to plenty of these meetings and the values have never been mentioned. This is the first time we've been told there is an actual risk to losing beachfront properties. I think if more people understood that, they'd be keen on hard engineering.
Thank you. I don't probably just highlighting that the values work was done maybe a year and a half ago, and then we kind of switched to making sure we presented the hazard information. So that may be why you didn't pick up the value stuff earlier on. And although we've tried as much as possible to get as many people along, often it doesn't show up on the radar of people, and they don't always come along. Hence why we're doing a letter drop this time to be a bit more targeted.
Thanks, Amon. And then we just have a couple of comments kind of supporting that position, that it's not the wider community that's at risk of losing their assets, and possibly beachfront owners may contribute towards boulder costs, is one comment. The next comment agrees with that and says there's a much bigger issue here that they think the wider community doesn't understand. Then we have a question. Can you explain how would a groin benefit Pāuanui Beach with respect to managing the erosion of our dunes?
It might help, and how it might help, I think, is a Shan question, or even a Rick, but probably Shan.
We did consider it, Amon, and when we looked at all of the options you could take, and we felt that it wouldn't provide the protection you'd require. It wouldn't be effective in this location.
Thanks, Shan. The next question we have is, this person agrees with the problems of having a rock or a hard solution that you described earlier, Shan, but then asks, wouldn't that decision be made then to assess whether to move houses? This step is missing from the chart, question mark.
I'm not quite sure I understand that. So suggesting a decision point after, or suggesting rocks go in prior to needing to move houses, is that the comment?
I think the comment is agreeing that there's issues with having a rock or a hard solution,
Yeah.
but then asking when the decision would be made whether to move or relocate houses, and they seem to think that step is missing from the chart.
So yeah, we'll look at that and make sure there is a decision. So didn't go explaining all of this, but the key up here shows a threshold. So that's when something's not acceptable. That kind of dotted line is when you need to transfer, and then there's a decision point. So here is showing a decision point because potentially the soft engineering isn't working, and then you transfer to a moving property. So that decision point is indicated in the long term, but without an actual understanding of 50 or 100 years, but when it becomes ineffective in terms of the soft engineering to protect properties. So there would need to be a decision down the track on that, yes.
Thanks, Amon. And the last comment we have, or the last couple we have, firstly a comment and then a question. The comment is, given beachfront properties and the reserve are at risk, a hard solution is the only logical solution. Soft planting won't stop erosion. The current council plan is to soft plant, which you say won't stop erosion. So why is it sensible? More of a comment than a question, that one. And then next question is, would a rock groin make the Tairua bar safer to cross for boats and assist with sand replenishment on the beach?
I think the last one, I think Sian answered previously in terms of a rock groin isn't considered to be effective. So that answer probably still stands on that towards that last comment.
That was specifically in reference to the making the Tairua bar safer. So for boat crossings and whether it would assist with sand replenishment on the beach.
Yeah, I can't answer that because I haven't looked at that in detail. I don't know if you can either, Sian.
I think Angus, I think you're referring to a type of training wall situation where you defend or protect a channel, and sometimes with training walls that does encourage sediment to come out of the mouth of the estuary and potentially come onto the beach. But we haven't looked at that, and you would have to look very carefully at where the sand might or might not go in that circumstance, and the effects it would have on the wider system, because it would be quite a significant intervention. But it's something we can take account of.
Thanks very much, Sian. We don't have any further comments or questions at the moment. There was a couple from further up the thread that Sian and Jamie have jumped in to answer.
Okay, well, we appreciate all that feedback. So quite a lot coming through there. Please do email or use the tool so we get more. What we will be doing next is gathering feedback from tonight and emails, and we'll be collating that for our coastal panels. We'll work through that to see how that influences and changes any of our proposed pathways, and then we'll be coming out to show the community, hopefully in person, where those pathways have landed. So appreciate you attending tonight. Please let others know that this process is happening and encourage them to provide feedback as well. The more feedback, the better from our point of view, even if we don't really mind what position it is in terms of getting more feedback on any position is better than no feedback, I think. So appreciate that. Once again, thanks for the team, Connie and Sian and Rick for answering some of those tricky questions, and have a good evening, good night, and take care.